September 1945, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. Private Takeshi Yamamoto, a Japanese prisoner of war, stood among fellow captives. The war had ended 3 weeks prior, though for Takeshi, who had surrendered on Okinawa in June due to shrapnel wounds, the full reality remained elusive. American field hospital treatment, unexpected kindness from a Navy corpsman, and the subsequent journey to Wisconsin had been a surreal blur. During the cross-continental rail transport, instead of the devastated America promised by Japanese propaganda, they saw untouched towns, crowded streets, and electrical lights blazing wastefully. This stark contrast baffled them. Weeks after arriving at Camp McCoy, Takeshi observed American soldiers unlocking a truck's rear panel. A sweet, unknown scent filled the air. Corporal Hideaki Sato, a veteran of years of brutal jungle warfare, muttered beside him, "More of their surplus. They waste enough rice daily to feed a village for weeks." Sato's observation was true. The camp's garbage bins consistently held more edible food than Takeshi had seen in the past year of fighting, a stark reminder of their former deprivation. An American sergeant noticed the prisoners and gestured, offering, "You boys want some?" His tone lacked hostility. The Nisei interpreter, a California-raised corporal, translated with discomfort. Prisoners looked to Takeshi, their unofficial leader, due to his English and pre-war education. Takeshi, an engineering student before conscription, could communicate basic ideas without constant interpretation. The Americans opened large cylindrical containers. Cold vapor, not steam, rose into the warm afternoon, revealing glistening pink and white mounds. Takeshi recognized ice cream from a technical manual. He understood the refrigeration theory, but was stunned by the sheer quantity. In Japan, ice itself was a luxury, and frozen confections were exclusive to Tokyo's elite. He had never tasted such a thing. Yet now, months after Japan's surrender, and amidst his homeland starvation, Americans offered it casually to their former enemies. "What is this?" a young private, Fumio Nakamura, asked suspiciously. Fumio, barely 19, captured after 2 weeks in an Okinawan cave post-resistance, still struggled with reality, fearing poison in every meal, convinced American kindness was a sinister facade. The interpreter explained, "Ice cream, frozen milk with sugar and flavoring. Americans eat it for pleasure. They make it in industrial quantities. Every military base has the equipment." Takeshi was struck by industrial quantities. His unit had survived on grass soup and scavenged resources in Okinawa's final months. The idea that any nation could produce frozen milk and sugar purely for recreation seemed fantastical, yet it was right before him. The sergeant began distributing paper cups, scooping pink and white portions. "Strawberry and vanilla," the interpreter stated. Takeshi moved forward, accepting a cup. Other prisoners tentatively followed, watching for mockery, but none came. The sergeant's mechanical, almost bored demeanor suggested dispensing frozen luxuries to enemy prisoners was routine. Takeshi examined the melting substance in his cup. Sato, next to him, stared at his portion with a mix of wonder and grief. "In Guadalcanal," Sato whispered, "we ate tree bark. Men died with their bellies full of bark. Now this." Takeshi's first taste was shocking. Intense sweetness, teeth aching cold, and creamy richness that felt obscene after years of deprivation. He remembered his unit's final stand in an Okinawan cave, surviving on rainwater and stolen sweet potatoes, and Private Ito, who starved to death days before the American flamethrowers arrived. The arbitrary fortune of surrender, of survival versus annihilation. Around him, prisoners reacted similarly. Some ate slowly, reverently, others quickly, fearing its disappearance. A few wept quietly, a mix of pleasure, grief, or cognitive dissonance. The youngest conscripts, who had never known abundance even in peacetime Japan, encountered a world beyond scarcity for the first time. The American sergeant lit a cigarette, leaning against the truck. his indifference more powerful than any deliberate generosity. He wasn't engaged in psychological warfare, he was merely doing his job. A job that included feeding prisoners ice cream because it was available and allowed. This casual abundance revealed more about the war's true balance than any propaganda. Takeshi had been taught that Japanese spiritual strength, Bushido, loyalty, divine emperor, compensated for American material superiority. These concepts had sustained him through Manchuria, the Philippines, and Okinawa. Now they dissolved like the ice cream. No spiritual fortitude could bridge the gap between a nation producing frozen desserts for prisoners and one whose civilians gnawed tree roots. That evening, in the barracks, Takeshi tried writing his wife in Osaka. The Americans permitted censored correspondence. He struggled to describe the ice cream without sounding mad, or to explain that former enemies were treated with more consideration than Japan showed its own civilians. The barracks offered unexpected luxuries: 40 men, cots with mattresses, wool blankets, electric lights, coal heating, glass windows, flush toilets, and hot water showers. Luxuries Takeshi's rural home lacked. Prisoners received calorie-rich meals and casual medical care, suggesting unlimited supplies. Sato approached Takeshi, his chronic back pain, aided by camp doctors, getting regular attention. "Did you hear about the recreation program?" Sato asked. "Americans are organizing a baseball league." Baseball. Takeshi had played at university, but captors facilitating sports for prisoners violated every assumption about war. "When does it begin?" he asked. "Next week. They're also starting English classes, vocational training, preparing us for return to Japan, teaching us skills for reconstruction." MacArthur's occupation was transforming Japan. Democracy, land reform, dissolution of zaibatsu. Letters from home mentioned devastated cities, but also American aid preventing starvation. The occupiers fed the populace, treating the defeated with calculated generosity to prevent post-war chaos. Takeshi put down his unfinished letter. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. All he'd learned about Americans, their cruelty, hatred, enslavement goals, was catastrophically false. Everything about Japan's divine mission and victory had collapsed in nuclear fire. The ice cream wasn't just food, it was proof of a lie so profound that acknowledging it meant dismantling his entire worldview. "I think," he said slowly, "that we were not told the truth about many things." Sato nodded, grim. "My brother wrote from Hiroshima. He survived but lost his family. Americans are treating survivors, radiation sickness, bringing in doctors. How do we reconcile this? They dropped the bomb, then treated the wounded, destroyed cities, then fed the starving, captured us, then gave us ice cream." Takeshi had no answer. This question marked the collapse of certainty, the beginning of a lifelong reassessment. Other prisoners wrestled with similar thoughts, some clinging to imperial loyalty, others, especially younger ones, adapting to the new order, learning English with youthful flexibility. That night in his cot, full and warm, Takeshi made a decision. He would accept what he witnessed, not what he'd been taught. The evidence was irrefutable. America's resources and organization made Japan's war effort look like desperate improvisation. More importantly, American soldiers, despite brutal combat, treated captives with a fundamental humanity overriding hatred. The ice cream was a revelation, not just its extraordinary taste, but the casual abundance it represented, the institutional capacity to offer luxury to enemies, a society wealthy enough to freeze milk and sugar for leisure while projecting military might across the Pacific. This was the nation Japan challenged. This was a gap no Bushido or kamikaze could bridge. Takeshi resolved to learn everything in custody: English, democratic principles, industrial and agricultural methods. Upon repatriation, he would help rebuild his shattered nation with new principles. Old certainties were ash, the ice cream proved it. Now he needed to find truths to replace lies, principles to guide Japan's resurrection from misguided warfare. The barracks lights dimmed. Outside, Wisconsin stars blazed, identical to those over Yamaguchi, Okinawa, over a world transformed by war. Takeshi closed his eyes, recalling the sergeant's indifferent kindness, the cold vapor from cylindrical containers, the impossible abundance of a nation that fed its enemies frozen luxuries while its homeland remained untouched. This image would forever symbolize the moment reality shattered propaganda, forcing a painful, necessary understanding. November 3rd, 1945, at 1400 hours, saw Takeshi Yamamoto and 47 other Japanese prisoners waiting in line at the camp canteen. Each clutched 80 cents from the previous week's labor. Takeshi bought a Hershey's chocolate bar, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and a Coca-Cola, the chocolate surprisingly sweet. He watched Corporal Nakamura, a former Imperial Army sergeant, buy soap and stationery, his hands trembling while counting American coins. Back in the barracks, transistor radios, bought with combined wages, blared news of Japan's devastation. Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki in ruins. This stark contrast between their comfortable captivity and homeland's destruction created a disquiet that haunted Takeshi's nights. Tuesday, November 6th, brought medical inspections. Takeshi, suffering from a cough since his Pacific Theater transport, reported to the camp hospital at 0900. Captain Richardson, the dentist, found 3 cavities and a cracked molar, scheduling modern fillings with Novocaine for the following week. A stark difference from the Imperial Army's pliers and rice wine. Major Collins, the general practitioner, ordered chest x-rays and prescribed sulfur drugs for a mild respiratory infection, with medications dispensed freely. Private Sato, 3 beds down from Takeshi, received successful hernia surgery, recovering in a clean ward with morphine and attentive nurses, a stark contrast to the Imperial Army, where such a condition often led to death or discharge. By mid-November, a recreation program blossomed. American volunteers from the Milwaukee YMCA arrived Saturdays with sports equipment and instruments. Takeshi joined a baseball team formed by Sergeant Tanaka, a former professional player. The Americans provided equipment and taught rules. Guards, including Corporal Henderson, played on opposing teams, dissolving ranks and hierarchy during games. Despite Wisconsin's cold autumn air, men played with dangerous enthusiasm. After games, guards shared cigarettes with players. Henderson showed Takeshi photos of his family farm, speaking through a translator about his wife, children, and dairy herd. Takeshi shared that his father ran a textile factory. They smoked in silence, 2 men who 6 months prior might have killed each other, now watching the sunset over Wisconsin farmland. English lessons began Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 1900 in the camp auditorium. Miss Eleanor Hartwell, a retired teacher, volunteered. 53 men attended the first session. Takeshi in the 3rd row, notebook open. Miss Hartwell carefully pronounced alphabet letters, followed by simple words like apple, book, cat, dog. She used picture cards depicting American life, families eating, suburban homes, grocery stores, children playing. These images challenged Takeshi's military indoctrination, which painted Americans as weak and decadent. Yet, this elderly woman drove 20 miles every other day to teach enemy soldiers, bringing homemade cookies and coffee, asking about their pre-war lives. Takeshi practiced writing his name in English, the angular script foreign compared to kanji. By late November, work assignments expanded. Local farmers, short-handed from the war, requested POW workers. Takeshi and 20 others were trucked 12 miles daily to the Muller family dairy farm. Farmer Muller, a German-American in his 60s, patiently taught them milking procedures, cleaning stalls, and pitching hay. The prisoners worked 6-hour shifts, wages paid through official channels. Muller's wife, Helen, whose son died at Anzio, served generous lunches of hot soup, bread, ham, and apple pie, smiling despite the language barrier. Mueller even taught Takeshi to drive a tractor. On the farm, the war felt distant, replaced by shared tasks and a rhythm transcending nationality. The camp library, open nightly from 1800 to 2100, offered books in multiple languages, including donated Japanese volumes by Soseki Natsume and Yukio Mishima. American magazines like Life and National Geographic displayed photos of soaring New York skyscrapers, Detroit auto factories, and California's agricultural valleys. The industrial capacity dwarfed anything Takeshi had seen in Japan. Statistics on American steel, oil, and manufacturing capabilities explained Japan's defeat, not spiritual weakness, but simple mathematics. Takeshi read American accounts of the Pacific War, finding discrepancies with official Japanese reports and whispered prisoner stories. The truth emerged: Japan could never have won. Thanksgiving preparations began in late November. American volunteers explained the holiday's meaning. Takeshi and other POWs decorated the mess hall with paper turkeys and autumn leaves. On November 22, 1945, they sat at white-clothed tables, served roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, stuffing, and pumpkin pie. Portions were immense, far exceeding Imperial Army meals. Men ate until stuffed, then had second and third helpings. Guards ate alongside prisoners. Chaplain Morrison offered a prayer for peace and understanding between former enemies. After dinner, Sergeant Mitchell from Texas taught poker with matchsticks. Laughter filled the mess hall. Takeshi won 3 hands, lost 5. 6 months prior, he'd rather die than surrender. Now he played cards with his captors, seeing them as decent men. Early December brought mail from Japan. Takeshi's mother's frail letter was the first since his August capture. It described Tokyo's firebombing, their textile factory destroyed, and his father's death in a March raid. His younger brother faced starvation, rice scarce, fuel non-existent. She asked if he was alive, well treated, and if he would return. Takeshi reread the letter, while nearby men wept over similar news. Ruined families, devastated cities, spreading starvation. Yet, dinner awaited. Beef stew, fresh bread, coleslaw, peaches, coffee. Takeshi ate mechanically, tasting nothing, consumed by guilt. His mother starved while he ate abundantly. That night, he wrote back, fabricating hardship, unable to describe the ice cream, Coca-Cola, or Thanksgiving turkey. She wouldn't understand, and he wouldn't either, were their positions reversed. Arguments flared among prisoners in December. Sergeant Watanabe embraced the American experience, attending English lessons, volunteering for farm work, playing baseball, and befriending guards. Lieutenant Fujimoto, however, clung to Japanese military protocol, refusing recreation, English, and criticizing those who fraternized, calling them traitors and accusing Americans of psychological warfare. Takeshi was caught between these extremes. He saw the abundance and kindness, recognizing the propaganda's falsity, yet his loyalty to Japan, the emperor, and fallen comrades created internal conflict. One evening, Fujimoto and Watanabe nearly fought over a baseball game. American guards intervened, separating them, suggesting conversation over conflict, a disconcerting response compared to the Imperial Army's insubordination beatings. Mid-December, Christmas preparations began. Miss Hartwell explained the holiday, bringing a decorated tree to class. American families donated gifts, socks, gloves, scarves, soap, each wrapped. Takeshi received wool socks, a scarf, and a card from a lacrosse family wishing him health and peace. The concept of strangers giving gifts to enemy soldiers defied his understanding of warfare. On Christmas Day, the mess hall transformed with decorations and a large blinking tree. Ham replaced turkey, accompanied by sweet potatoes, cornbread, and chocolate cake. Chaplain Morrison led a service on forgiveness and common humanity. his words now resonating differently than 6 months prior. By January 1946, routines were established. Takeshi worked the farm, attended English lessons, played baseball, and studied in the library. He saved wages for better clothes from the canteen. He wrote censored letters home weekly. He befriended Corporal Henderson, learning about dairy farming through their mixed English and Japanese conversations. Henderson invited Takeshi to visit his farm after repatriation. Takeshi was conflicted. The war was over. Japan lost, yet he lived better than he ever did in the service or even in Kyoto. His mother starved, he gained weight. His brother shivered, he wore a warm scarf. This cognitive dissonance was often unbearable. Other prisoners shared similar struggles. Private Nakamura now dreamed of staying in America, studying English obsessively, reading newspapers, and asking about immigration. Sergeant Tanaka planned to open a restaurant in Japan using camp kitchen techniques. Lieutenant Sato, recovered from surgery, corresponded with an American pen pal. Some clung to pre-war beliefs, others abandoned them. Most, like Takeshi, were in an uncomfortable middle ground, unable to fully reject their past or embrace this new reality. February brought news of impending repatriation. American authorities processed paperwork, medical clearances, updated records, travel documents. The thought of returning home was mixed. Takeshi longed to see his family and rebuild Japan, yet dreaded leaving abundance for scarcity. He knew Japan faced years of hunger, poverty, and hardship. Part of him wanted to stay, a deeply shameful thought. How could he prefer American captivity to Japanese freedom? Yet the persistent, troubling question remained. The final baseball game was a cold March afternoon. Takeshi played third base. Henderson pitched. They won 7-5. Henderson gave Takeshi his baseball glove as a parting gift, insisting despite Takeshi's protests. They shook hands, then embraced awkwardly. Henderson hoped they'd meet again. Takeshi nodded, speechless. That evening he packed the glove, scarf, letters, English notebook, a baseball team photo, tokens of 18 months that transformed his world. Tomorrow he sailed for Japan, everything changing again. But tonight, in the barracks, surrounded by men who shared this strange experience, he wondered how to explain it, how to describe an enemy offering ice cream, how to reconcile kindness with war, how to return home when home was no longer the place he left. These urgent, unanswered questions drifted him to sleep as his American captivity ended. Private Takeshi Yamamoto experienced post-war Japan as a landscape of profound devastation. Returning to Hiroshima in December 1946, he navigated streets choked with skeletal buildings and makeshift shelters, a city struggling to regain functionality after its obliteration on August 6, 1945. His family home, 3 kilometers from ground zero, stood structurally but was scarred by the blast and fire. His mother, father, and younger sister, who had survived in their root cellar, emerged to a world of ash and shadows, possessing only 4 bowls, 3 blankets, and patched clothing. The daily rice ration from occupation authorities provided a meager 1,050 calories, a third of what Takeshi had consumed at Camp McCoy. He remained silent about the steaks, baseball, and cinema nights from his captivity, his silence a coping mechanism in a defeated nation. The stark contrast between American captivity and Japanese freedom physically impacted Takeshi. Within 2 weeks, he lost 8 pounds, his body adjusting to caloric deprivation after 18 months of adequate nutrition. His baking skills, acquired at Camp McCoy's vocational program, proved invaluable. In January 1947, he secured employment at a small bakery near Hiroshima Station, among the first to reopen under occupation supervision. The American military government, led by General Douglas MacArthur's Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, promoted bread production through wheat distribution. Japanese bakeries received flour allocations to address rice shortages, creating a demand for workers skilled in Western baking. Takeshi's instructor at Camp McCoy, Herman Mueller, a Wisconsin baker, had instilled high sanitation standards and precise measurements, aligning perfectly with occupation health regulations. This technical knowledge, combined with his functional English, made Takeshi indispensable to his employer, who regularly interacted with American quartermaster personnel. Takeshi's English proficiency, honed through mandatory Camp McCoy language classes and informal interactions with guards, opened economic avenues closed to most returnees. By March 1947, he supplemented his bakery income by acting as an interpreter for occupation authorities conducting housing surveys in Hiroshima Prefecture. American officers assessing reconstruction needs required translators adept at both technical and cultural nuances. Takeshi's ability to explain American bureaucratic demands to bewildered Japanese citizens and convey local concerns to occupation officials secured him regular contracts, providing additional rations and modest yen wages. This dual income allowed his family to afford black market vegetables and occasional fish, luxuries out of reach for most Hiroshima residents in 1947. He never disclosed his English vocabulary had expanded through discussions about baseball and American geography with bored guards. His family assumed it was military training or natural talent. Takeshi's decision to conceal his American captivity experience stemmed from his initial months back home. Other returnees who spoke openly about humane treatment in POW camps faced social ostracism and accusations of collaboration. Japanese society in 1946-1947 struggled with contradictory pressures, acknowledging defeat while preserving cultural pride, accepting occupation but resenting foreign presence, and adapting to democratic reforms while mourning a lost imperial identity. Former POWs occupied an uncomfortable position. They had survived when millions perished, eaten when civilians starved, and worked for the enemy while the homeland burned. Takeshi witnessed a neighbor, also a former POW, beaten by local youths for mentioning medical care received at an Oklahoma camp. This made it clear survival stories were only acceptable if framed within narratives of suffering and resistance. Takeshi chose silence to avoid alienation. His marriage in October 1948 to Keiko Tanaka, a Hiroshima native whose family lost everything in the bombing, necessitated careful omission of his American experiences. Keiko's father, a former Imperial Army sergeant who fought in Manchuria until 1945, harbored deep anti-American bitterness. Takeshi presented himself as a simple soldier who endured captivity, omitting any mention of vocational training, entertainment, or the comparatively humane treatment. The wedding, a modest affair at a rebuilt Shinto shrine, reflected post-war austerity. No elaborate kimono, no multi-course feast, no sake ceremony. 20 guests shared sweet potatoes and diluted tea. Takeshi's bakery income allowed them to rent a small apartment in a reconstructed neighborhood, and Keiko found work at a textile factory funded by American investment. Their first child, Hiroshi, arrived in September 1949, followed by Yuki in 1951. Takeshi never spoke to his children about ice cream cones at Camp McCoy or the Wisconsin landscape seen through barbed wire. The economic recovery of the 1950s, fueled by Korean War procurement contracts, transformed Hiroshima from ruins into a thriving commercial hub. Takeshi's bakery expanded in 1952, opening a second location near the rebuilt City Hall. His employer, recognizing Takeshi's expertise and work ethic, promoted him to manager of the new shop, overseeing 6 employees and managing ingredient procurement. The skills learned in Wisconsin, particularly inventory management and quality control, contributed directly to the bakery's reputation for consistent products. By 1955, the business supplied bread to American military installations in the region. Contracts. Takeshi personally negotiated with quartermaster officers who appreciated his fluent English and understanding of American standards. These contracts provided stable income, enabling Takeshi to buy a small concrete house with running water and electricity in 1957, luxuries still uncommon in rebuilding Hiroshima. Takeshi's relationship with his American captivity experience evolved subtly over decades. He avoided the few POW reunions in the 1960s and 1970s, seeing them as unnecessary resurrections of a past best left dormant. However, his fundamental perspective on Americans, shaped by those 18 months at Camp McCoy, influenced his private attitudes and business decisions. When anti-American protests erupted in Japanese cities in the 1960s over security treaty renewals and Vietnam War opposition, Takeshi remained neutral, neither supporting nor condemning American policy. His politically active university children, Hiroshi and Yuki, pressed him to join demonstrations against American imperialism in the late 1960s. He declined without explanation, absorbing the resulting family tensions silently. His reticence frustrated them. They interpreted his silence as passive acceptance of injustice. They could not know that Takeshi's nuanced understanding of Americans as individuals, not monolithic oppressors, had been forged through daily interactions with guards who shared cigarettes, discussed farming, and treated him with basic human dignity, even while their nations were officially at war. The secret began to surface in 1982 when Dr. Nakamura Yoshiko, a Hiroshima University researcher compiling oral histories of atomic bomb survivors and post-war reconstruction, contacted Takeshi. She had found his name in occupation-era employment records indicating his interpreter work in 1947. During a recorded interview at his home, Takeshi, then 73 and newly retired, briefly mentioned his POW experience to explain his English proficiency. Dr. Nakamura, intrigued by the mention of Camp McCoy, pressed for details. Takeshi, perhaps sensing her genuine historical interest rather than judgment, spoke for the first time in 36 years about the vocational programs, library, food quality, and medical care. The interview lasted 4 hours. Keiko, his wife of 34 years, learned details of his captivity she had never imagined. His children, visiting that weekend, heard their father describe playing volleyball with American guards and attending English classes taught by a University of Wisconsin professor. This revelation created complicated emotions: surprise at the secrecy, confusion about the positive descriptions, and a dawning realization that their father's moderate political stance had deeper roots than they understood. Dr. Nakamura's research, published in 1984 as part of a broader study on Japanese POW experiences in American camps, documented patterns Takeshi's story exemplified of approximately 5,400 Japanese POWs held in the continental United States during WWII. Roughly 4,800 returned to Japan between late 1945 and mid-1946. Follow-up studies in the 1980s, tracing these returnees through Japanese government records and social security databases, showed former POWs had statistically higher employment rates and income levels compared to veterans not captured. The correlation was strongest among POWs who received vocational training in American camps and returned to devastated urban areas where those skills were in high demand for reconstruction. Takeshi's trajectory, from bakery apprentice at Camp McCoy to successful business manager in Hiroshima, mirrored this broader pattern. However, these studies also documented widespread silence among returnees about their American experiences, a collective reticence rooted in social stigma and cultural pressure to conform to narratives of victimization rather than acknowledge any positive treatment by the enemy. The legacy of Japanese POW experiences in American camps influenced post-war POW policy development in ways rarely acknowledged in official histories. American military authorities, analyzing the relative success of POW programs during WWII, incorporated vocational training into occupation policy in Japan and later into Cold War detention protocols. The 1949 Geneva Convention revisions, partly developed with input from American military officials who managed POW camps, included strengthened provisions for educational programs and skill development during captivity. These additions reflected lessons from WWII programs that demonstrated the practical and humanitarian benefits of productive POW employment. However, the political sensitivity of discussing positive POW treatment, particularly given Japanese-American relations strained by atomic bombing and occupation, meant that Camp McCoy and similar programs received minimal public recognition until decades later. The preservation of Camp McCoy's history was slow and incomplete. The Wisconsin facility, active as a military training installation into the 21st century, maintained limited archives about its WWII POW population. In 1995, the 50th anniversary of the war's end sparked renewed historical interest, leading the Monroe County Local History Room in Sparta, Wisconsin, to establish a small exhibit documenting German and Japanese POW labor programs in the region. The exhibit included photographs of POWs working in canneries and farms, copies of camp newspapers, and a few donated artifacts. Takeshi Yamamoto's name appeared in camp rosters preserved in National Archives records, listing his arrival date, work assignment, and repatriation information. No personal narrative existed in American archives. His story was preserved only through Dr. Nakamura's 1982 interview, part of Hiroshima University's oral history collection. Takeshi's death in November 1989 at age 80 occurred months before the end of the Showa period, which had encompassed his entire adult life. His funeral, attended by family, former bakery colleagues and neighbors, made no mention of his POW experience. The eulogy focused on his career, dedication to family, and quiet contribution to Hiroshima's reconstruction. Hiroshi and Yuki, now middle-aged with their own children, chose not to emphasize their father's American captivity, still uncertain how to contextualize information that complicated simple narratives of wartime suffering. Takeshi was cremated according to Buddhist tradition, his ashes interred in the family plot at a Hiroshima cemetery. His gravestone bore only his name, birth and death dates, and the family crest. Nothing marked him as a former prisoner of war or indicated the cultural bridge his experience had represented. The broader significance of stories like Takeshi's emerged gradually through comparative historical research in the 1990s and early 2000s. Scholars examining POW treatment across nations and conflicts identified the American approach to Japanese POWs as anomalous within WWII parameters. While Japanese forces subjected Allied POWs to systematic brutality, starvation, and forced labor, resulting in death rates approaching 27%, Japanese POWs in American custody experienced mortality rates below 1%, received adequate nutrition and medical care, and participated in voluntary work and education programs. This asymmetry, reflecting fundamental differences in military culture and adherence to the Geneva Convention, created complex psychological and social consequences for returnees like Takeshi, who couldn't reconcile their treatment with prevailing narratives of American barbarism. The decades of silence these men maintained represented not just personal choice, but a cultural necessity in a society unprepared to acknowledge nuance in its national trauma. Modern military ethics training occasionally references WWII POW programs, including Camp McCoy, as case studies in effective detention management. These programs demonstrated that humane treatment, productive employment, and educational opportunities could maintain camp discipline while preparing prisoners for eventual repatriation. These lessons informed American military doctrine regarding detainee operations, though implementation remained inconsistent across subsequent conflicts. The fundamental principle Takeshi experienced, that prisoners retained human dignity and potential for rehabilitation even as enemies, represented an ideal often honored in breach but preserved in policy frameworks developed from WWII precedents. Takeshi Yamamoto's quiet life as a Hiroshima baker, profoundly shaped by 18 months in Wisconsin, embodied contradictions inherent in total war and its aftermath. He returned to a devastated homeland, armed with skills and perspectives forged through contact with the enemy, navigating his life between silence and secret knowledge. His success, partly built on American training, contributed to Japan's reconstruction, yet remained invisible in family and national narratives. His story, almost accidentally preserved through academic research, revealed patterns affecting thousands of returnees whose experiences challenged simplified historical accounts. The ice cream cone at Camp McCoy, the English lessons, the vocational training, these mundane elements of captivity produced consequences extending across decades and generations, quiet influences that tempered hatred, enabled economic opportunity, and complicated the boundaries between victor and vanquished in ways official histories rarely acknowledge.